The old beggar. Move to the back, old man. Beggars don't belong in family photos. Those were the words Vanessa said to me, loud enough for the photographer, the caterer, and half of my son's backyard to hear, while she physically took the frame from my hands and shoved it into the arms of a stranger. My name is Daniel. I was 68 years old, wearing a jacket that had gone out of fashion 2 decades earlier, and standing in my own son's garden at his engagement party. And in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that my daughter-in-law-to-be had no idea who she was talking to. I want to tell you the whole story, because it isn't really about revenge. It's about what happens when people decide your worth based on your shoes. 3 months earlier, my son Marcus called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice doing that nervous thing it always did before he told me something important. "Dad, I want you to meet someone. Her name is Vanessa. I think she's the one." I was happy for him, genuinely. Marcus had spent his 20s chasing a career in finance in the city, and after his divorce 5 years earlier, he'd become guarded, careful, slow to trust. If he'd found someone who made him excited to pick up the phone and call his old man, that was good news in my book. I should explain something about myself, because it matters for what comes later. I built a manufacturing supply company from a single rented warehouse in 1987. 40 years, growing it inch by inch, reinvesting almost everything, living modestly because that's simply who I am. I don't wear expensive suits. I drive a 12-year-old truck. I eat the same diner breakfast every Sunday I've eaten since Marcus was in diapers. My late wife, Elena, used to laugh and call me allergic to spending money, and she wasn't entirely wrong. But the company was real enough that 3 years ago I sold 60% of it to a private equity group for an amount that still occasionally keeps me up at night doing the math. I kept a board seat. I kept my old truck. I told almost nobody because I never saw the point of announcing it. Marcus knew, of course. He'd grown up watching me build it. But he also knew I preferred people to get to know me before they got to know my bank account, and he respected that. He respected it so much, in fact, that he apparently never mentioned it to Vanessa. The first dinner. I met Vanessa on a Friday night at a restaurant Marcus picked, someplace with candles in mason jars, and a menu that didn't list prices, which should have told me something about the evening ahead. She was beautiful in the way that takes effort and money and knows it. Sleek dark hair, a designer bag she set on the table like a centerpiece, and a smile that reached exactly as far as her cheekbones and no further. "So you're Daniel," she said, looking me over the way you'd look over a used car with a suspicious mileage reading. "Marcus told me you're retired. What did you do before?" "I ran a small supply business," I said. It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't the whole truth, but I've never felt obligated to hand strangers my balance sheet over appetizers. Something in her face shifted, a door quietly closing. "Oh, that's nice." The rest of dinner, she talked to Marcus. She talked about the wedding venues she'd already researched, though they weren't even engaged yet, about a designer she was obsessed with, about a friend's husband who just made partner at his firm and bought a house in the hills. Every few minutes her eyes would flick toward me, taking inventory of my worn watch, my department store shirt, my hands that still had calluses from 40 years of walking factory floors. When the bill came, I reached for it out of habit. Vanessa's hand shot out and covered Marcus's wrist instead. "Sweetheart, let's get this one. I don't want your dad to feel obligated." She said it kindly enough on the surface, but underneath the message was unmistakable. "I don't think you can afford it." I let it go. I told myself she was young, that first impressions with future in-laws are nerve-wracking for everyone, that I should give her time. I gave her time, it didn't help. The pattern. Over the following months, it became a pattern I couldn't ignore. At a family barbecue, Vanessa introduced me to her college friends as Marcus's father. He's retired now, does some odd jobs. At Marcus's birthday dinner, she suggested, in front of everyone that maybe I should let the younger generation cover this one, and slid the check toward her own father instead, a man in a blazer who owned 2 dry-cleaning franchises and never missed a chance to mention it. At Thanksgiving, she rearranged the seating chart so I sat at the far end near the kids' table, since you probably want to be near the little ones anyway, Daniel. I actually love the little ones, so I didn't mind that part. What I minded was the way she said my name, like it was something slightly distasteful she had to keep repeating. Marcus, to his credit, tried to smooth things over more than once. "Vanessa, that's my dad, come on." But Vanessa had a gift for making her cruelty sound like consideration, like generosity, like she was doing me a favor by not expecting more from a man clearly living on a fixed income and the goodwill of his son. I never corrected her. Every time I opened my mouth to explain, something in me held back. Call it stubbornness. Call it an old man's curiosity about how far a person will go when they think there's no cost to it. I wanted to see who she really was before she knew who I really was. I found out at the engagement party. The engagement party. Marcus proposed in April. On a hiking trail, Vanessa had not so subtly suggested 100 times, complete with a photographer hidden in the bushes. 2 weeks later came the engagement party, held in the backyard of Vanessa's parents' house, string lights and white folding chairs, and a catering spread that probably cost more than my first car. I arrived in my good jacket, the navy one I save for weddings and funerals, carrying a gift for the happy couple and, if I'm honest, carrying a little hope too. Hope that this would be the day Vanessa softened, saw me as family instead of an inconvenience wearing the wrong shoes. Instead, when the photographer gathered everyone for the formal family portrait, Vanessa's mother waved me in warmly. "Daniel, come stand next to Marcus, your family." And that's when Vanessa turned, saw me stepping into the frame, and said the words that would end up changing everything. "Move to the back, old man. Beggars don't belong in family photos." She laughed after she said it, a bright little laugh meant to make it sound like a joke, but her eyes weren't laughing. She physically stepped in front of me and gestured for one of the caterers, a young man in a black vest, to take my spot instead. "You'll ruin the whole composition standing there in that jacket. Just stand behind everyone, or better yet, go get yourself a plate from the back table." The backyard went quiet, Marcus's face drained of color. "Vanessa, what are you?" "I'm just being practical, baby," she said, still smiling for the crowd. "Every photo needs balance. We can't have him standing front and center looking like he wandered in off the street." A few of her friends actually laughed. Her father chuckled into his drink. Nobody defended me except my son, who looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. I could have said something then. I could have told her exactly who she was talking to. Instead, I did something I think surprised everyone, including myself. I smiled, nodded, and quietly walked to the back table, picked up a small plate of appetizers, and sat down at the edge of the party like the old beggar she decided I was. And I waited. The reveal. I didn't wait long. I waited exactly long enough. 3 weeks later, I hosted a dinner. Not at my house, which admittedly still looks modest from the outside, tucked behind an old oak tree with a truck in the driveway that's older than some of Vanessa's shoes. I hosted it at a private dining room I own a controlling stake in, at the top of a building downtown that also happens to bear my company's name on the lobby directory. 3 floors up from the offices of the private equity firm that now runs the operational side of the business I spent my whole life building. I invited Marcus. I invited Vanessa. I invited her parents, since her father had been so free with his own bragging over the months, and I thought it only fair he get to see a little of mine. When they arrived, the maitre d' greeted me by name before I'd said a word, the way people do when your name is on the deed. I watched Vanessa's face as she clocked the marble floor, the view of the whole city through floor-to-ceiling windows, The framed photo in the hallway of a much younger me shaking hands with a mayor at a ribbon cutting for a distribution center I'd built. Daniel, this place is. Her mother started at a loss. Mine, I said simply. Well, mine and some very patient investors. I built the company that owns this building's ground floor, the logistics firm 2 floors down, and a chunk of the parking structure across the street. Started it in 1987 out of a warehouse with a leaking roof. Sold most of it a few years back, kept a seat on the board because I get bored easily in retirement. The silence at that table had a completely different texture than the silence at the engagement party. That one had been the silence of a room laughing along with cruelty. This one was the silence of people recalculating everything they thought they knew in real time on their faces. Vanessa's father set down his wine glass very carefully, like it might give him away. I had no idea. No, I said, you didn't, neither did your daughter. I looked at Vanessa. To her credit, or perhaps just to her survival instinct, she didn't try to bluff her way through it. Her face had gone pale under her makeup. Daniel, about the engagement party, I didn't mean. You meant every word, I said, not unkindly, because I wasn't there to humiliate her the way she'd humiliated me. I was there to teach a lesson, and there's a difference. You looked at an old man in a worn jacket and decided he had nothing worth respecting. You didn't know my balance sheet. That's not the point. The point is you decided my worth before you knew a single true thing about who I am, based entirely on what I was wearing and how I talked and what car I drove. That's not a mistake you make about money. That's a mistake you make about people. And it's the same mistake you'll go on making, richer or poorer, unless something changes. Marcus reached over and took my hand under the table, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. I looked at him and saw he already understood what I was doing and why. I'm not telling you this to punish you, I continued, looking back at Vanessa. I'm telling you because my son loves you, and because somewhere under the labels and the seating charts, I think there might be a decent person who got very good at mistaking cruelty for confidence. You get to decide which version of yourself walks out of this dinner. But I want to be very clear about one thing. I will not sit at the back table again. Not at my son's wedding, not at his children's birthdays, not ever. You will treat me the way you'd treat anyone deserving of basic respect, not because of what's in my accounts, but because that's simply the price of being part of this family. Is that understood? Vanessa's eyes were wet, and for the first time since I'd met her, I believed the emotion on her face was real. Understood, she said quietly. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I was cruel and I don't have a good excuse for it. No, I agreed. You don't, but you have a chance to be better than that moment. That's more than a lot of people get. After Marcus and Vanessa did get married 6 months later, on a modest afternoon, Vanessa insisted on planning herself. No hidden photographers this time. No seating chart engineered to erase anyone. She asked me personally if I would stand beside Marcus in the family portrait. I did, front and center in my navy jacket, the same one that had once been declared unfit for the frame. I won't pretend the transformation was instant or perfect. Old habits, especially the ones built on insecurity dressed up as taste, don't disappear over one dinner. But Vanessa started asking me questions instead of assumptions. She started listening when I talked instead of glancing past me towards someone more interesting. Last month she called me, just to ask my opinion about a decision at her own job. The first time she'd ever asked me anything that wasn't really a statement in disguise. Marcus told me privately that the engagement party had haunted her for weeks before that dinner, that she'd known even before I revealed anything that she'd done something ugly and small in front of everyone she wanted to impress, and that the not knowing what I'd do about it had been its own kind of reckoning. People ask me sometimes if I regret letting it go on as long as it did, sitting quietly through months of small humiliations before I finally spoke up. I don't, not really. Because if I'd corrected her the first night at that candle-lit restaurant, she would have learned to respect my money. Instead, she was forced to sit with the discomfort of having been genuinely, unmistakably cruel to a person she believed had nothing to offer her, and to reckon with what that said about her rather than about my bank account. That's a harder lesson, but it's the one that actually changes a person. I still drive the old truck. I still eat the same diner breakfast every Sunday. And now, every time I walk into a family gathering, Vanessa is the first one to pull out a chair for me, front and center. No matter who's watching. Some people learn what respect costs. Others learn the hard way, what it costs them not to give it.